You're just a bitter old woman because my parents have money. My daughter-in-law yelled at me during my retirement party. My son nodded. It's true, Mom, you're useless. I answered, then tell your parents to return the $2 million loan I gave them. She dropped to the floor the moment I said it. I thought my retirement party, after 37 years of dedicated work, would be a triumphant celebration, a final proud moment. Instead, it became the night my own son stood by, nodding as his wife publicly tore me apart, calling me a bitter old hag in front of everyone I knew. The country club sparkled around us. White tablecloths, fresh flowers, a cake with my name on it. It should have been perfect. But I stood frozen, watching Damon agree with Fallon as she leveled her accusation, her voice cutting through the polite murmur like a knife. You're just bitter because my parents have money, she sneered, her perfectly manicured finger pointing, her designer dress glinting under the chandeliers. You've always been jealous of our lifestyle. The room went silent. My colleagues, my neighbors, even the catering staff stopped, staring. A familiar heat crept up my neck, that burning humiliation I hadn't felt since I was a child, shamed in front of the class. Then Damon, my son, piped up, his tone casual, almost bored. Really, Mom? You're not useful anymore. Why don't you just accept that and stop trying to insert yourself into our lives? Not useful anymore. The words echoed in my head, a cruel twist to the heart. This 35-year-old man, the boy I'd raised alone after his father died when he was just 8. The son I'd worked double shifts for, sent to private school, eating peanut butter sandwiches for weeks just to make ends meet. Fallon kept going, her voice shriller now. Honestly, Lorna, it's embarrassing how you try to keep up with us. We know you're struggling financially. Damon told me about your little apartment, your old car. It's sad, really. She turned to the crowd, playing to them. She keeps trying to give us advice about money when she can barely afford her own groceries. It's pathetic. A ripple of murmurs, pity in their eyes. Mrs. Patterson from next door actually shook her head, as if I were some helpless charity case. That's when something inside me snapped. Not the explosive kind of snap, but a quiet, final one. Like a door closing permanently. I took a deep breath and smiled. Not the fake smile I'd worn all evening, but a real, true one. The kind that comes when you finally stop pretending. Fallon, sweetheart, I said, my voice clear and calm, cutting through the hushed room. Since you brought up money, I think it's time we discuss something. She rolled her eyes. Oh, here we go. Another lecture from the $2 million, I interrupted, still smiling. The color drained from her face so fast I thought she might faint. She actually swayed, gripping Damon's arm. What are you talking about? Damon asked, his casual confidence gone. I turned to the room just as Fallon had. You see, everyone. Fallon's parents needed a rather substantial loan a few years back. $2 million to be exact. They were facing some financial difficulties. Fallon's mouth opened and closed like a fish. You can't. I can and I am, I said pleasantly. The loan was made 3 years ago, with very reasonable terms. 5% interest to be paid back over 7 years. Of course, they've only made about 6 months of payments so far. The crowd stared, no longer with pity, but with fascination. A tennis match indeed. That's impossible, Fallon whispered, her voice cracking. I pulled out my phone, a few taps, and I turned the screen toward the crowd. Would anyone like to see the loan documentation? It's all quite legal and above board. Damon stepped closer, squinting at the screen. His face went white as he saw the numbers. Mom, what is this? That, Damon, is $2,437,612.18. That's what your wife's parents currently owe me, including the accrued interest they've been ignoring. Fallon made a strangled sound, grabbing a chair. This has to be some kind of mistake. You're a bookkeeper. You live in that tiny apartment. You drive a 15-year-old Honda. I do drive a 15-year-old Honda, I agreed. And I do live in a small apartment. But you know what they say about assuming things, dear? The soft jazz music from the speakers was an almost surreal soundtrack to the unfolding scene. You see, I continued, my voice growing stronger, your parents came to me in quite a panic 3 years ago. Their business was failing. They were facing bankruptcy and needed capital immediately. They'd heard through mutual friends that I might be able to help. Fallon shook her head frantically. No. My parents have money. They've always had money. They paid for our wedding. They bought us the house. With my money, I said simply. All of it. Every dollar your parents have spent in the last 3 years came from that loan. Damon sank into a chair, pale and utterly confused. But you always said you didn't have much. You said you were just getting by on your pension. I said I lived simply, I corrected. I never said I was poor. Fallon's breathing became rapid and shallow. She looked around, desperate for an escape. This is insane. You're lying. You're making this up because you're jealous and bitter. And would you like me to call your parents right now? I asked, pulling up their number. I'm sure they'd be happy to confirm the details. No, Fallon shouted, then lowered her voice. No, don't. Don't call them. Why not, sweetheart? If I'm lying, surely they'd be happy to set the record straight. Fallon's face crumpled. For a moment, she looked like a lost child, not the sophisticated woman who'd been tearing me apart minutes earlier. Please, she whispered. Please don't do this. But I was done pleasing people who had never shown me the same courtesy. Done being treated like a burden by the family I'd sacrificed everything for. I looked around the room, faces now filled with respect and curiosity. Then at my son, slumped in his chair, still processing. Enjoy the rest of the party, everyone, I said, tucking my phone away. I think I'll head home now. As I walked toward the door, I heard Fallon's voice high and desperate. Lorna, wait! We need to talk. We need to! But I didn't stop. I didn't turn around. With each step, I felt lighter than I had in years. The valet brought my 15-year-old Honda, and as I drove away, I couldn't help but smile. Tomorrow, I thought, was going to be a very interesting day. I didn't sleep much that night. Instead, I sat in my small living room, a cup of tea in hand, surrounded by photo albums and financial documents I hadn't looked at in years. The silence felt different now. Not lonely, but peaceful. For the first time in decades, I wasn't worried about disappointing anyone. The photos told a story I'd almost forgotten. There I was at 28, holding baby Damon, exhausted but radiant. My husband, Robert, had died just 2 months earlier in a construction accident, leaving me with a mortgage, a newborn, and $347 in our checking account. I traced my finger over the picture, remembering that terrified young woman. She had no idea what she was capable of. The insurance money was modest, barely covering the funeral and a few months' mortgage. Everyone told me to sell the house, move in with my mother. But something inside me refused. This was Damon's home. His father had painted the nursery walls blue, built shelves for the children's books we'd never read together. So I kept the house and found a job. Not just any job, but at Henderson & Associates, a small accounting firm that needed someone willing to work odd hours for lower pay. I started as a receptionist, but I watched, learned everything. Numbers always made more sense to me than people did. Within 2 years, I was handling the books for 3 of their biggest clients. Within 5, I was essentially running the financial side of the business, while Harold Henderson played golf and did client lunches. He paid me enough to keep the lights on, but I was building something else on the side. It started small. I'd noticed inefficiencies in clients' businesses, tax advantages they were missing, investment opportunities overlooked. I started making quiet suggestions that saved them thousands. Word spread. Soon, I was doing financial consulting in the evenings and weekends, working with small business owners who couldn't afford the big firms, but needed someone who understood money. I charged modest fees, delivered exceptional results. My reputation grew. By the time Damon was in middle school, I was managing investment portfolios for a dozen local businesses. I'd incorporated my own consulting firm, kept it quiet, and funneled profits into carefully chosen stocks and real estate. I lived modestly, drove used cars, and let everyone assume I was just getting by on my bookkeeper's salary. The truth was, I was building an empire. A quiet, invisible empire no one suspected existed. I learned early that people treat you differently when they think you have money. They want things from you, expect things, feel entitled to pieces of your success. I watched wealthy clients at Henderson deal with constant pressure from family, endless requests for loans. I didn't want that for Damon. I wanted him to have a normal childhood, develop his own work ethic, his own values. So I hid my growing wealth behind a facade of middle-class struggle. I shopped at discount stores, clipped coupons, complained about costs like my neighbors did. But I also made sure Damon never wanted for anything important. Private school tuition appeared magically. College funds materialized. There was always money for what mattered. I just made it seem like I was stretching every dollar, sacrificing for him. Looking back, I can see the flaws. So focused on not spoiling Damon, I may have overcorrected. He grew up thinking I was barely scraping by, that every opportunity he had was the result of my struggle. In a way, that was true. But he never understood the scope of what I'd built, the security I'd created for both of us. When Damon graduated college, I quietly used my connections to help him land his first job. When he wanted to start his own consulting firm, I arranged for several of my clients to become his first customers. When he expanded, I made sure the bank approved his loan. He thought he was succeeding on his own merit, and in many ways, he was. I'd raised him to be smart and hardworking, but I'd also been smoothing his path in ways he never realized. Then came Fallon. I remember her first dinner at our home. Beautiful, polished, expensive in a way that spoke of country clubs and European vacations. Designer clothes, real jewelry, unshakable confidence. She looked around my modest apartment with barely concealed disdain, making small comments about the quaint decor. During dinner, she regaled us with stories of her parents' trips to Tuscany, their new yacht, their vineyard plans. She spoke casually about money, clearly never having worried about it. When she mentioned her father owned several car dealerships, I understood the wealth. What I didn't understand was why she seemed so determined to make me feel small. Damon tells me you work as a bookkeeper, she said, dripping with pity. That must be challenging, making ends meet on that kind of salary. I smiled politely, said it was honest work. I didn't mention I'd just closed a consulting deal that would net me more in 6 months than most people made in 2 years. After they left, I couldn't shake the feeling I'd been assessed and found wanting. Fallon had looked at my small apartment, my simple lifestyle, and dismissed me as irrelevant. I told myself it didn't matter. But as their relationship progressed, I saw changes in Damon. He started making comments about my situation, asking if I needed help with bills, suggesting I move to a smaller place to save money. The concern in his voice was genuine, but it stung. My own son was beginning to see me through Fallon's eyes. The wedding was a spectacle, costing more than most people's houses. Fallon's parents spared no expense. I wore a simple dress from a department store, sitting in the 3rd row, watching my son marry into a world that made my life seem insignificant by comparison. After the wedding, the distance grew. Damon and Fallon moved into a house Fallon's parents helped them buy, furnished with antiques and art that cost more than I'd spent on furniture in my entire life. When I visited, I felt like a tourist in a museum, afraid to touch anything. Fallon was always polite, but in the way you're polite to service providers. She'd ask about my job with feigned interest, comment on my cute car, offer to help me shop for better clothes. Every interaction left me feeling smaller, less significant. And Damon, perhaps without even realizing it, began to adopt her perspective. He stopped asking for business advice, called less frequently. When we did talk, conversations felt stilted, as if he were speaking to an elderly relative he felt obligated to check on. That's when Fallon's parents reached out to me. 3 years ago, on a Tuesday evening, my phone rang with an unrecognized number. Margaret Wheeler, Fallon's mother, was on the other end, her voice tight with desperation. "Lorna, I hope you don't mind me calling," she said. "But we're in a bit of a situation, and someone mentioned you might be able to help." The story came out in fits and starts. Bad investments, market downturns, cash flow problems spiraling out of control. The car dealerships were hemorrhaging money, creditors circling, bankruptcy looming. They needed capital immediately. Traditional lenders had turned them down. "We heard through mutual acquaintances that you might have some resources," Margaret said carefully. "Connections, perhaps, or knowledge of private lenders." I almost laughed. Here was this woman who had looked down on me for years, calling for help from the poor bookkeeper. But something in her voice stopped me. Genuine fear. The terror of losing everything that defined her family's identity. I could have said no. Should have, probably. But I thought about Damon, how devastated he'd be if his wife's family lost everything. I thought about Fallon, for all her faults, how this would shatter her world. And maybe, deep down, I thought this might be a bridge, a way to finally be seen as valuable, as someone worth respecting. "How much do you need?" I asked. The amount was staggering, $2 million. More money than most people see in a lifetime. But I had it, sitting in investment accounts that had been growing steadily for decades. We met the next day at a lawyer's office downtown. Margaret and Richard Wheeler sat across from me, their faces pale with stress and humiliation. The lawyer, a sharp woman in her 50s specializing in private lending, walked us through the terms. 5% interest payable monthly over 7 years. Personal guarantees from both Richard and Margaret. Full disclosure to immediate family members about the loan structure. Except there was no disclosure. The Wheelers made it clear they wanted to keep the details private to maintain their dignity and their daughter's respect. I understood. Pride is a powerful thing, and they'd already swallowed enough of theirs to ask for help. So we structured it as a private investment in their business, with paperwork that would only become relevant if payments were missed. To everyone else, including Fallon and Damon, it would look like the Wheelers had found an angel investor. Not that they were borrowing money from the woman their daughter treated like a charity case. The first few months went smoothly. Payments came on time, businesses stabilized, the Wheeler family maintained their lifestyle. Fallon never knew how close they'd come to losing everything or who had saved them. But then the payments started coming late. Then they stopped altogether. Now, sitting in my living room with the loan documents spread across my coffee table, I realized what I should have seen from the beginning. The Wheelers hadn't just been borrowing money. They'd been buying time, maintaining appearances, hoping something would change. And when nothing did, they'd simply decided to ignore their obligations. After all, what could the poor bookkeeper do about it? They were about to find out. The morning after my retirement party, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The fog of hurt and confusion was gone, replaced by something sharper, more focused. I made my coffee, sat at my kitchen table, and began making phone calls. The first was to my lawyer, Patricia Collins. We'd worked together for years, but we'd never been particularly close. That was about to change. "Patricia, it's Lorna Hastings. I need to schedule a meeting as soon as possible. It's about the Wheeler loan and some other matters that have come up. Her voice sharpened with interest. Has there been a development with the repayment situation? You could say that. Can you meet me this afternoon? I'll make time. The second call was to Marcus Chen, my financial advisor. Marcus had managed my portfolio for 15 years, one of the few people who truly understood the scope of my wealth. He was also incredibly discreet. Marcus, I need you to run a comprehensive analysis on all accounts connected to Damon Hastings. Loans he's co-signed, credit lines, investments, everything. I want to understand his complete financial picture. There was a pause. Lorna, is everything all right? You sound different. Everything is about to be very different. How soon can you have that information? Give me 24 hours. The third call was the hardest. I dialed my son's number, knowing that after last night, our relationship had fundamentally changed. He answered on the fourth ring, his voice cautious. Mom, how are you feeling today? I'm feeling quite well, actually, I said, my tone pleasant but businesslike. Better than I have in a long time. I was hoping you and Fallon could come by this evening. About last night, Mom. Fallon is really upset. She barely slept. Maybe we should wait a few days for things to cool down. No, Damon, tonight, 7 o'clock. This can't wait. I hung up before he could argue. The meeting with Patricia that afternoon was illuminating in ways I hadn't expected. She spread the Wheeler loan documents across her conference table, along with several other files I hadn't seen. Lorna, there's something you need to know about the Wheeler situation. They've been shopping around for refinancing options for the past 6 months. They've approached 3 different private lenders trying to consolidate their debts. My stomach tightened. What kind of debts? Beyond your loan, they owe approximately $400,000 to various creditors. Credit cards, supplier payments, equipment leases that went into default. They've been using your money to service minimum payments on everything else while letting your loan slide. The betrayal stung, but it wasn't the worst part. Patricia pulled out another document, this one stamped with the seal of the probate court. They also filed a preliminary inquiry 6 months ago about challenging estate plans. Specifically, they wanted to understand the process for contesting wills when there are questions about mental capacity. The room seemed to tilt. Whose will? They didn't specify, but given the timing and the context, I think we can make some educated guesses. I stared at the document, pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. They think I'm losing my mental capacity. It appears they're laying groundwork for that argument, yes. The inquiry specifically asked about situations where elderly individuals make financial decisions that seem inconsistent with their established patterns of behavior. Like a poor bookkeeper somehow having $2 million to loan to people. Exactly. I leaned back, processing. The Wheelers weren't just defaulting. They were planning to claim I'd never been competent to make the loan in the first place. If they could establish I was mentally incapacitated, they could potentially void the entire agreement. Patricia, I want you to do something for me. I want a complete psychiatric evaluation performed by the most respected neuropsychologist in the state. Cognitive tests, memory assessments, everything. And I want it documented that I requested this evaluation myself, while clearly demonstrating sound judgment. She nodded, making notes. That's smart. It establishes baseline competency and shows you're taking proactive steps. There's more. I want you to prepare a new will, a very specific one. I spent the next hour outlining exactly what I wanted. Patricia's eyebrows rose higher with each instruction, but she dutifully recorded everything. That evening, Damon and Fallon arrived at my apartment exactly at 7. Fallon looked like she'd been crying, her perfect makeup smudged. Damon seemed nervous, fidgeting with his car keys. Please sit down, I said, gesturing to my small living room. Can I get you anything to drink? Mom, we really need to talk about last night. Damon began immediately. Fallon's parents are very upset. They're saying you're confused about some financial arrangement, but they don't want to embarrass you by... Stop. My voice cut through his rambling like a knife. Just stop talking for a moment and listen. I retrieved a folder. These are copies of all the loan documents between your wife's parents and myself. Every page is signed, notarized, and legally binding. I handed the folder to Damon, watching his face as he flipped through the pages. His expression shifted from skepticism to confusion to dawning realization. This is real, he said quietly. Very real. $2 million borrowed 3 years ago. Payment stopped completely 8 months ago. Current amount owed, including interest and penalties, is $2,612,118. Fallon finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. How do you have this kind of money? I earned it. Over 30 years of careful investing and business consulting. While you were assuming I was some pathetic old woman barely scraping by, I was building a financial portfolio that would make your parents' car dealerships look like a lemonade stand. Damon set the folder down with shaking hands. But you never said? You always acted like money was tight. You live in this small apartment. Because I choose to, I said. Because I learned a long time ago that people treat you differently when they know you have money. They start seeing you as a resource rather than a person. I looked directly at Fallon. Your parents came to me because they were facing bankruptcy. They begged me to help them, promised they would be faithful with payments, swore this would stay confidential to protect their dignity. I agreed because I thought it would help my son's marriage. Fallon's face had gone completely white. They told me they found an investor, some businessman who believed in the company. I am that businessman, Fallon. I saved your parents from losing everything. I made it possible for them to maintain their lifestyle, to continue funding your expensive tastes, to keep up appearances in your social circle. Damon ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I remembered from his childhood when he was overwhelmed. I don't understand. If you have all this money, why did you let us think? Why did you let me worry about your retirement, your future security? The hurt in his voice almost broke my resolve. Because I wanted you to love me for who I am, not what I have, I pressed on. I wanted to know that you valued our relationship, not just my ability to solve your problems with money. And now? Fallon asked, her voice hollow. I pulled out my phone and showed them a recording app. Now I know exactly what you both think of me. Last night, in front of 50 people, you called me bitter, pathetic, useless. You made it clear that you see me as a burden, an embarrassment. I played a section of audio. Their own harsh words filled the small room. Fallon flinched. I recorded everything, I said simply. The entire conversation is documented. Damon leaned forward, his face desperate. Mom, we were upset. We said things we didn't mean. No, Damon, you said exactly what you meant. You said what you've been thinking for years. What Fallon has been telling you about me. That I'm worthless. That I have nothing to offer. That my presence in your lives is an inconvenience. I stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. What you don't know is that I've been supporting your lifestyle for years. That consulting firm you started? 3 of your first 5 clients were companies I referred to you. The bank loan for your expansion? I co-signed it quietly through a subsidiary corporation. The silence behind me was deafening. That house you live in? I helped structure the financing in ways that saved you hundreds of thousands in taxes and interest. Your retirement accounts, your investment portfolio, even Fallon's jewelry collection, all of it was made possible by advice, connections, and direct financial support that you never knew about. I turned back to face them. Damon looked stricken. Fallon appeared to be in shock. But here's what's really interesting, I continued, my voice growing colder. I discovered today that your parents haven't just been ignoring their debt to me. They've been actively planning to have me declared mentally incompetent so they can void the loan entirely. Fallon's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. They filed inquiries with the probate court about challenging wills and estate plans. They've been laying groundwork to claim that I was mentally incapacitated when I made the loan, that I couldn't possibly have had that kind of money to lend. Damon stared at me in horror. They wouldn't. They couldn't. They absolutely could. And they were planning to, with your help. What do you mean? I pulled out the final document. This is a statement prepared by a private investigator I hired. It details conversations you've had with Fallon's parents over the past 6 months about my declining mental state and your concerns about my erratic behavior with money. Damon's face went ashen. That's not... I never said you were incompetent. I was just worried about you, about some of the decisions you were making. Like what decisions, Damon? Like living in this small apartment when you could afford better. Like driving that old car. Like not taking vacations or enjoying your retirement. It seemed like you were hoarding money irrationally, or maybe not understanding your own financial situation. The pieces fell into place with devastating clarity. So when Fallon's parents needed character witnesses to support their claim that I wasn't mentally competent to make large financial decisions, they had your concerned observations to back them up. I didn't know, Fallon whispered. I didn't know they were planning anything like that. But you knew about the loan. Not at first. They told me last month when you stopped returning their calls about payments. They said you were confused, that you thought they owed you money, but it was all a misunderstanding. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. A $2 million misunderstanding. They said you were getting old, maybe mixing up your clients' money with your own. They were trying to figure out how to handle it gently, without embarrassing you or getting you in trouble. How thoughtful of them. Damon stood suddenly, pacing. This is insane. This whole thing is insane. My mother is apparently a millionaire. My in-laws are con artists, and my wife's family has been planning to destroy you legally. That's a fairly accurate summary. He turned to me, desperate. What happens now? I looked at my son, this man I'd raised and loved and protected, who had stood by and watched his wife tear me apart because he believed I was beneath his notice. Then I looked at Fallon, beautiful and entitled and completely unprepared for the world that was about to come crashing down around her. Now, I said quietly, you both learn what it really costs to treat someone as disposable. The next morning, I began dismantling the invisible support system I'd built around my son's life, with the methodical precision of a surgeon removing a tumor. Each cut was clean, calculated, and irreversible. My first stop was First National Bank. James Morrison, the senior vice president, greeted me with the warm familiarity reserved for clients whose portfolios commanded respect. Lorna, wonderful to see you. How was your retirement party? I heard it was quite the celebration. It was illuminating, James. That's actually why I'm here. We sat in his office. I pulled out a folder containing loan documents and co-signer agreements Damon had never known existed. I need to remove myself as guarantor from the Hastings Consulting business credit line. James frowned. This is a substantial facility, Lorna. $750,000. Your guarantee is what made this loan possible. Without it, the loan will need to be restructured based solely on the business's current assets and cash flow, which may not qualify for the same terms or amount. That's Mr. Hastings' problem to solve. James studied my face, clearly recognizing this wasn't a casual decision. Are you certain? I'm completely certain. The second stop was Meridian Investments, where Marcus Chen managed my portfolio. The analysis you requested is complete, Marcus said, handing me a thick report. Your son's financial situation is more precarious than I expected. I flipped through the pages, my suspicions confirmed. Damon's consulting business was heavily leveraged, dependent on credit lines I'd guaranteed and clients I'd referred. His personal finances were stretched thin. Without the business income from those 3 major clients, his cash flow will be negative within 60 days, Marcus explained. Those 3 major clients were all companies I'd been consulting with for years, businesses I'd directed to Damon. I want you to contact Reynolds Manufacturing, Berkshire Holdings, and Patterson Logistics, I said. Inform them that I'll be taking over their accounts directly, effective immediately. Marcus raised an eyebrow. That's approximately 60% of Hastings Consulting's revenue. Yes, it is. Lorna, I have to ask, is everything all right? These seem like very drastic measures. I thought about Damon's words from the previous night. Everything is exactly as it should be, Marcus. My third stop was the most difficult. Margaret Wheeler had agreed to meet me for lunch at the country club, where my retirement party had taken place just 2 days earlier. She looked older, stress lines deepening, her usual composure cracked. Lorna, thank you for agreeing to meet. I hope we can work this out amicably. We sat at a quiet table overlooking the golf course, the same view I'd had when Fallon called me pathetic. The irony wasn't lost on me. Margaret, I'm going to be very direct. I know about the probate court inquiries. I know about your plans to challenge my mental competency. And I know you've been using money from my loan to service other debts while ignoring your obligations to me. Her face went pale, but she maintained her dignified composure. I don't know what you're talking about. I placed a folder on the table between us. These are copies of every financial transaction your family has made in the past 6 months, courtesy of a very thorough forensic accountant. Shall I read through them? Margaret's hands trembled. How did you... That information is private. Not when you're in default on a $2 million loan, it isn't. My attorneys have been very thorough. I opened the folder. March 15th, payment to American Express. $20,400. March 18th, payment to Mercedes-Benz Financial. $8,900. March 22nd, payment to Fallon's credit card. $14,600. Margaret's composure finally cracked. Please. April 3rd, wire transfer to Fallon's account for her European vacation. $28,000. April 7th, payment to the country club for her bridal shower. $6,200. Stop, she said. I closed the folder. Every payment I just listed was made with money from my loan. Money you promised would be used to stabilize your business. Instead, you've been funding your daughter's lifestyle while planning to claim I'm mentally incompetent so you don't have to pay me back. Margaret stared down at her untouched salad. Her voice barely a whisper. We were desperate. The business was failing faster than we expected. We thought if we could just maintain appearances, something would turn around. And if it didn't turn around? She didn't answer. You were going to destroy my reputation, question my mental capacity, and potentially have me declared incompetent. All to avoid repaying money you borrowed in good faith. It wasn't supposed to happen like this, she murmured. But it did happen like this. And now there will be consequences. I pulled out a formal notice Patricia had prepared. This is a demand for immediate payment of the full outstanding balance plus penalties. $843,712 due within 30 days. Margaret's face went white. We don't have that kind of money. You know we don't. Then you'll need to liquidate assets. The dealerships, the house, the yacht I've heard so much about. Please, Lorna, there has to be another way. What if we could work out a new payment plan? Margaret, you had a payment plan. You ignored it for 8 months while spending my money on luxury items and planning to have me declared incompetent. There is no new payment plan. She was crying now. This will destroy us. Fallon doesn't know how bad things are. This will ruin her marriage. Her whole life. Her marriage is built on a foundation of lies and borrowed money. Maybe it's time she learned to live in the real world. I stood to leave, but Margaret grabbed my arm desperately. Wait, there's something else you need to know about Damon. I sat back down, curious despite myself. Fallon has been working on him for months, convincing him that you're becoming unstable. She's been documenting every conversation you've had, every decision you've made that seemed unusual to her. She was building a case. A case for what? For having you declared incompetent. She wanted Damon to petition for guardianship over your affairs. The restaurant seemed to tilt. Guardianship. She convinced him that you needed protection from yourself, that you were making poor financial decisions and needed someone to manage your money before you lost everything. A cold fury built in my chest. She wanted control of my assets? We all thought you maybe had a few $100,000 saved up. Enough to be worth managing, but not enough to matter in the long run. And Damon agreed to this? Margaret nodded miserably. He loves you, Lorna. He really does. But Fallon made it sound like he was protecting you. She showed him articles about elderly financial abuse, stories about seniors who lost their savings to scams. She made him believe that taking control of your finances was an act of love. I stared across the golf course, processing. My own son had been prepared to strip away my autonomy. To treat me like a child who couldn't manage her own affairs, all because his wife had convinced him it was for my own good. When was this supposed to happen? Soon. Fallon was waiting for one more incident. Something she could point to as evidence of declining capacity. She thought your retirement party might provide the opportunity. And it did, didn't it? My revelation about the loan. She'll claim that's proof I'm delusional. Margaret looked ashamed. That was the plan. I stood again, this time with finality. Thank you for telling me the truth, Margaret. It changes nothing about the loan. But at least now I understand the complete picture. What happens now? I looked down at this woman who had raised the daughter-in-law who was systematically poisoning my relationship with my son, who had taken my money while planning my destruction. Now you face the consequences of your choices. All of you. That evening, I sat in my small apartment reviewing the day's events. 3 phone calls had already come in from Damon. Apparently, his business credit line had been frozen, and 2 of his major clients had terminated their contracts. I let each call go to voicemail. The 4th was from Fallon. Her voice was high and panicked. Lorna, we need to talk. There's been some kind of mistake with the bank, and my parents are saying crazy things about loans and money, and Damon is having problems with his business. Please call me back. We need to figure this out. I deleted the message and poured myself a glass of wine. Outside, the city sparkled in the darkness, full of people living their lives, making their choices, facing their consequences. Tomorrow, I would take the next step. Tonight, I would enjoy the silence. For the first time in years, no one was taking anything from me. No one was manipulating me, using me, or planning my downfall. I was finally completely in control of my own life. And it felt magnificent. The desperate attempts to reconcile began exactly 72 hours after I'd frozen Damon's credit line. I was in my kitchen making breakfast when I heard frantic knocking, followed by Fallon's voice. Lorna, please. I know you're in there. We need to talk. This has gone too far. I finished buttering my toast before walking to the door. Through the peephole, I saw Fallon pacing, her usually perfect hair disheveled, makeup smudged. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. I opened the door but didn't invite her in. Hello, Fallon. You look tired. Please, she said, her voice cracking. Please, can we just sit down and talk about this? There's been some terrible misunderstanding. There's been no misunderstanding. Would you like me to play the recording from my retirement party again? The one where you called me a bitter old hag? She flinched. I was upset. I said things I didn't mean. People say things when they're emotional. People reveal who they truly are when they're emotional. That's when the masks come off. Fallon's eyes filled with tears, and for a moment I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. My parents are losing everything, she whispered. The bank is foreclosing on the dealerships. They're talking about selling the house. Damon's business is falling apart. His clients are leaving. His credit line is frozen. We might lose our house too. I imagine that must be very stressful for you. Don't you care? Damon is your son. Don't you care what this is doing to him? I leaned against my doorframe, studying this young woman who'd spent 3 years treating me like an embarrassing relative she was forced to tolerate. Tell me, Fallon, when you were planning to have me declared mentally incompetent, did you care what that would do to me? Her face went white. I don't know what you're talking about. Your mother told me everything. The guardianship plan, the way you've been documenting my behavior, convincing Damon that I needed protection from myself. You were going to take control of my finances and treat me like a child who couldn't manage her own affairs. Fallon's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. The irony is beautiful, isn't it? You thought I was some pathetic old woman with maybe a few $100,000 you could manage for me. Instead, you discovered I have enough money to destroy your entire family's financial stability with a single phone call. Please, she said again, but the word came out strangled. Please, what? Please let your family keep the money they stole? Please pretend that you didn't spend 3 years treating me with contempt. Please ignore the fact that you were planning to strip away my autonomy? I stepped back into my apartment. The answer is no, Fallon. To all of it. I closed the door before she could respond, but I could hear her sobbing on the other side. Part of me, the part that had raised Damon alone, that had always tried to be the peacemaker, wanted to open the door and comfort her. But that part of me had died at my retirement party when my own son called me useless. An hour later, Damon arrived. He looked haggard, older than his 35 years, wearing clothes he'd slept in. This time I did let him in, but I didn't offer him coffee or ask him to sit down. Mom, you have to stop this. Whatever point you're trying to make, I get it. You're angry. You have every right to be angry, but this is destroying innocent people. Innocent people? I raised an eyebrow. Your wife was planning to have me declared incompetent so she could control my money. Your in-laws borrowed $2 million from me, and then planned to claim I was mentally unfit to have made the loan. Where exactly do you see innocence in any of this? Damon ran his hands through his hair, a gesture so familiar that my heart clenched. I didn't know about any of that. I swear to you, Mom, I had no idea what they were planning. But you did think I was becoming mentally unstable? He was quiet for a long moment. I was concerned about some of your choices, living in this small apartment when you could afford better, driving that old car, not taking vacations. It seemed like you might be having trouble managing your money properly. So, you were prepared to take away my right to make those choices? I thought I was protecting you. From what? From living the way I wanted to live? From spending my money the way I chose to spend it? From making decisions that might hurt you in the long run? I stared at my son, this man I'd raised to be independent and strong, who had been so easily manipulated into believing his mother was incompetent. Damon, I've been managing money successfully for 30 years. I built a consulting business from nothing. I accumulated wealth that you can't even comprehend. I made investments that turned thousands into millions. And you thought I needed your protection? I didn't know about any of that success. You never told me. Because I wanted you to love me for who I am, not what I have. I wanted our relationship to be real. His voice cracked. It is real, Mom. I do love you. No, Damon. You love the version of me that you can feel superior to. The struggling bookkeeper who needed your concern and your management. You don't love the successful businesswoman who's been supporting your career behind the scenes for years. That's not true. I walked to my desk and pulled out a folder. These are copies of every favor I've done for you, every client I've referred, every loan I've guaranteed, every obstacle I've quietly removed from your path. For 15 years, I've been ensuring your success while letting you believe you were doing it all on your own. Damon took the folder with trembling hands, flipping through pages of bank documents, client referral letters, and guarantee agreements he'd never known existed. Why? He whispered. Because I wanted you to have confidence in yourself. I wanted you to believe in your own abilities. But I also wanted to protect you from failure. And now? Now you get to find out what you can actually accomplish without my help. Mom, please. I know I've made mistakes, but I'm your son. Doesn't that mean anything? I looked at this man who shared my eyes and my stubborn chin, who had been the center of my world for 35 years. It means everything, Damon. That's why this hurts so much. Then don't do this. Don't destroy my marriage, my business, my whole life over something that can't be undone. I'm not destroying anything. I'm simply stopping my support. You're a grown man with a college degree and 15 years of business experience. If you can't maintain your lifestyle without secret help from your mother, then maybe that lifestyle was never really sustainable. What about Fallon? She made mistakes, but she loves me. She's pregnant, Mom. My heart skipped a beat. What? She's 8 weeks pregnant. We just found out yesterday. She's terrified about what's happening with our finances, with her parents. The stress isn't good for the baby. For a moment, the room was completely silent. A grandchild. Another chance at family, at love that wasn't tainted by manipulation and greed. Then I remembered Fallon calling me pathetic. Damon agreeing that I was useless. The guardianship papers that would have stripped away my autonomy. Congratulations, I said quietly. Mom, please, for the baby's sake, can't we find a way to work this out? I walked to the window, looking out at the city that had been my home for so many years. Somewhere out there, Margaret and Richard Wheeler were probably meeting with bankruptcy attorneys. Somewhere else, Fallon was crying over bank statements and foreclosure notices. "I'll make you a deal," I said finally. Damon's face lit up with hope. Full repayment of the Wheeler loan within 60 days. 2,043,712, his face fell. "You know they don't have that kind of money. Then they'll need to liquidate assets. Houses, businesses, investments, jewelry, everything. That will leave them with nothing. They'll have their health and their freedom. That's more than they were planning to leave me with." "What about my business? What about the guarantees you withdrew? Your business succeeds or fails based on your own merit now. No more help from me. And us? What about our relationship?" I turned back to face him, memorizing his features. "That depends entirely on you, Damon, whether you can love and respect the real me, not just the version you thought you could control." He was crying now. Silent tears. "I never wanted to control you. I thought I was helping. I know you did. That's what makes this so tragic." After he left, I sat in my quiet apartment as the afternoon faded into evening. The silence felt different now, heavier. I was getting what I demanded. Respect, recognition, consequences for those who had wronged me. But the cost was higher than I'd anticipated. A grandchild was coming and I might never know him or her. My son might never forgive me for this. The family I'd spent 35 years building and protecting was crumbling around me. But for the first time in years, no one was taking advantage of me. No one was manipulating me or planning my downfall. I was finally free to be exactly who I was without apology or explanation. The question was freedom worth the price of being alone? I poured myself a glass of wine and watched the sun set over the city, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new choices, new consequences. But tonight I was simply Lorna Hastings, successful businesswoman, millionaire, survivor. And that would have to be enough. 6 months later, I stood in the lobby of the Meridian Tower wearing a tailored navy suit that cost more than most people's monthly salary. The marble floors gleamed, reflecting the crystal chandeliers. This was my building now, one of 3 commercial properties I'd purchased in the past month. The elevator carried me to the 15th floor, where glass doors bore the inscription, "Hastings Financial Consulting, Private Wealth Management." My new office occupied the entire floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city. My assistant, Claire, a sharp woman in her 40s, greeted me with my morning schedule. "Good morning, Mrs. Hastings. You have the Peterson consultation at 10 Vrouws, lunch with the mayor's Economic Development Committee at noon, and the Forbes interview at 3. "Thank you, Claire." "Any messages?" "Several. Your lawyer called about the Wheeler bankruptcy proceedings. Everything is finalized. Your accountant needs to review some tax implications for the new acquisitions." And she hesitated. "Your son called again. That's the 4th time this week." I nodded, taking the message slip without looking at it. Hold my calls until after the Peterson meeting. The transformation had been gradual at first, then sudden. After Damon left my apartment that day, I'd made a decision that changed everything. I was done hiding who I was. Within a week, I'd hired the best image consultant, updated my wardrobe, and had professional photographs taken. I'd registered Hastings Financial as a full-service wealth management firm and begun reaching out to the network of contacts I'd built over 3 decades. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Whispers of the mysterious investor who'd been making smart money moves behind the scenes had been circulating for years. When I emerged from the shadows, clients lined up to work with the woman who'd quietly built a fortune, while maintaining the discretion they valued. My first major coup was convincing 3 family trusts, worth a combined $800 million, to move their portfolios to my firm. Word spread quickly. Lorna Hastings was the real deal. The Wheeler bankruptcy had been swift and brutal. Unable to meet my payment demands, they'd been forced to liquidate everything. The car dealerships sold for pennies on the dollar. The house went to pay creditors. The yacht, the art collection, even Margaret's jewelry, all of it went to auction. They'd moved to a modest apartment, both taking jobs they were overqualified for. Richard worked as a sales manager at a used car lot. Margaret worked part-time at a real estate office, showing houses she could never afford to live in again. Fallon had been devastated. The pregnancy had been difficult, complicated by stress and the dramatic change in her circumstances. She'd lost the designer clothes, the spa treatments, the lifestyle that had defined her identity. Worst of all, she'd had to watch her parents' humiliation, knowing it was partially her fault. Damon's business had struggled initially after losing my support, but he'd proven more resilient than I'd expected. He downsized, moved to a smaller office, and focused on building genuine relationships with clients rather than relying on my referrals. It was harder work, less profitable, but more honest. They'd sold the house I'd helped them buy and moved to a modest 3-bedroom in a middle-class neighborhood. Damon drove a used sedan. Fallon shopped at Target instead of Nordstrom. But they were surviving. The baby had been born 3 months ago, a healthy daughter they'd named Emma. The birth announcement had been simple, sent by mail with a small photograph. No elaborate celebration, no expensive gifts from grandparents. Just a quiet welcome for a new life entering an uncertain world. I'd stared at that photograph for a long time, memorizing my granddaughter's tiny features, wondering if I'd ever hold her, ever know her laugh or comfort her tears. The Forbes interview that afternoon was supposed to focus on my business success, but the journalist was more interested in the personal story. "You've become something of a legend in financial circles," she said, her recorder capturing every word. "The bookkeeper who secretly built an empire. What drove you to keep it hidden for so long?" I considered the question carefully. I learned early that people's perception of you changes when they know you have money. They start seeing you as a resource rather than a person. I wanted my relationships to be based on who I was, not what I had. And did that strategy work? I smiled, but there was sadness in it. It revealed exactly what my relationships were really worth. "You've been estranged from your son for 6 months now. Do you have any regrets about how you handled the situation?" "I regret that it was necessary. I don't regret standing up for myself." "What would it take for reconciliation?" I thought about that question long after the interview ended. What would it take? An apology would be a start, but not enough. Real change, genuine respect, acknowledgement of the damage that had been done. Those things took time to develop and even longer to prove. That evening, I was reviewing acquisition proposals in my penthouse apartment. I'd finally moved out of my modest rental when my doorman called. "Mrs. Hastings, there's a young woman here with a baby. Says she's your daughter-in-law. Should I send her up?" I hesitated for a long moment. "Yes, send her up." 5 minutes later, I opened my door to find Fallon standing in my hallway holding a pink bundle. She looked different, older, more tired, but somehow more real. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore jeans and a sweater, and there was something in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Humility. "Hello, Lorna. Thank you for seeing me." "Come in." She walked into my new living room, taking in the expensive furniture, the original artwork, the floor-to-ceiling windows with their stunning view. But her attention quickly returned to the baby. "This is Emma," she said quietly. "Your granddaughter." I stared down at the sleeping infant, feeling my heart constrict with a longing I'd been suppressing for months. She had Damon's nose and what looked like my chin. "She's beautiful. Would you like to hold her?" With trembling hands, I reached for my granddaughter. She was so light, so perfect, so completely innocent of all the pain and betrayal that had brought us to this moment. "I owe you an apology," Fallon said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not just for what I said at your party, but for everything. For the way I treated you, the way I convinced Damon to see you as a burden instead of the remarkable woman you are." I looked up from the baby to study Fallon's face. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something that looked like genuine remorse. "I was spoiled and entitled and cruel," she continued. "I thought money and status were the only things that mattered. I looked down on you because I thought you had less than me. And I was threatened when I discovered you had more. And now I understand what my parents did to you, what I participated in doing to you. We took advantage of your generosity and your love for Damon. We planned to take away your autonomy. We treated you like you were disposable." She was crying now, silent tears she didn't try to wipe away. "I know you have every right to hate me. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I wanted you to